Hello and welcome back to Live from Paris here on France 24. It's good to have you with us. I'm Haxi Myers-Belkin. These are the headlines. Air pollution levels in New Delhi reach over 30 times the recommended maximum as a blanket of toxic smog settles over the city. Flights are delayed and schools are closed. Dozens of Iraqis storm the Iranian consulate in the Shiite holy city of Karbala, south of Baghdad. This as protesters across the country continue to demand an overhaul of the political system. And rival demonstrations in Lebanon as thousands turn out once again for anti-government protests to demand systemic change following the resignation of the Prime Minister. An earlier rally in support of President Michel Aoun drawing a smaller crowd. Thank you very much for joining us. Also coming up this hour, bad news for committed smokers here in France, but possibly an incentive for those trying to quit. The government has raised the price of cigarettes for the 9th time in just 2 years in a push to get even more people to kick the habit. And environmental activists in Brazil express outrage at the murder of an indigenous member of Guardians of the Forest, a group of tribesmen in the Amazon who work to protect their land from criminal logging gangs. Government critics decrying a culture of impunity for those who commit environmental crimes in the country. A thick blanket of toxic smog has settled over New Delhi, with pollution levels now the worst they've been in recent years. Air quality was so compromised that dozens of flights were delayed or diverted from Delhi airport. The air quality index, determined by the prevalence of so-called PM 2.5 particles in the atmosphere, hit 810 on Sunday. 25 is the recommended safe maximum, according to the World Health Organization. A little earlier, we spoke to France 24's Mandakini Galot in the Indian capital.
Yesterday, pollution levels hit an all-time high, with one official who consults with the Indian Health Ministry saying that the city's official monitors that monitor the pollution had run out of digits, which is to say that they hovered at around 999 for the air quality index. And it's likely that the air quality was far, far worse than that, but it's just that the monitors couldn't measure it. Now, why does this happen every year? Now, officials have said, there are several official reports, in fact, that have said that 44% of the air pollution that happens in Delhi and surrounding areas every year is due to something called crop burning, which is a practice that has been practiced for centuries by farmers in the North Indian states, where they burn the stubble of their previous crop to prepare the ground for the next harvest. Now, for several years, authorities have been working together. Authorities in Delhi have been working together with authorities in the neighboring states to try and introduce modern technology, better measures to shift the timing of this crop burning. But it doesn't seem to be getting to be under control. There's a lot of blame game going on amongst the politicians here. Keep in mind that a lot of these states went to state elections earlier this year, and farmers are a major constituency. So there's only that much that politicians can push them to change a custom that is centuries old. And indeed, it's a custom that helps them to prepare the ground for the next harvest. So really, Delhi and the surrounding states are stuck in a situation where they will have to figure out how to bring this sort of crop burning to a halt. Now, despite all that, politicians, including the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, have refrained from commenting. There's a lot of silence. When they do speak, they come up with sort of tone-deaf measures. India's Health Minister, for example, yesterday advised people to stay indoors and eat carrots to protect themselves against night blindness and other pollution-related harm. Meanwhile, the country's Environment Minister suggested that you should start your day with music and shared a link to a scintillating thematic compilation. So there's a lot of suggestions being made, which I think everyone here agrees that it's time now for more serious action. Doctors here are seriously worried. Just on Thursday, a report came out that suggested that the lifespan of people in Delhi has been reduced by up to 7 years due to the air pollution.
Iraqi protesters have attacked the Iranian consulate in the city of Karbala, scaling concrete barriers and replacing an Iranian flag with an Iraqi one. That coming as anti-government protesters in Baghdad and southern Iraq took to the streets yet again in a new wave of civil disobedience, demanding systemic change in the country. On Sunday, roads were blocked and government offices forced to close their doors. The movement has left dozens dead since it began at the beginning of October. Andrew Hillier has the details.
It's scenes like these that Tehran will be watching nervously. In Iraq's southern city of Karbala, one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam, hundreds of protesters are shown gathering outside the Iranian consulate, throwing stones into the compound. They reportedly scaled the concrete barriers before bringing down the Iranian flag and hoisting an Iraqi one in its place. A symbolic move, and the first time protesters have directly targeted the country's neighboring Shia powerhouse, Iran. Iraqis accuse Baghdad's political elite of squandering the country's vast wealth, but they also blame Shia militias linked to Iran for cracking down on demonstrations. Further south, for a fifth day, protesters blocked access to Iraq's biggest port in Qasr, a key gateway for food and other supplies. Officials warn further disruption could lead to price rises.
The port's closure directly affects people because Iraq's food passes through here: grain, vegetable oil and sugar. As a result, prices will increase across the country and distributors will have to find different supply routes.
Mass protests first broke out in Baghdad and the Shia-majority south back in October. Since then, a crackdown by security forces has cost the lives of more than 250 people. Iraqis are calling for sweeping changes, starting with the resignation of the government. In an effort to appease protesters, the country's prime minister said he would submit a new election law to parliament this week, paving the way for early elections. But the process of holding a vote and forming a new government could drag on for several more months.
Thousands have gathered once again in the Lebanese capital, demanding a complete overhaul of the political system and the formation of a new interim technocratic government. The movement has united a number of religious groups in the country, all of them angry at what they say are years of corruption and economic mismanagement. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a smaller rally turned out in support of President Michel Aoun, as he urged different protesting groups not to pit themselves against each other. Shirley Sitbon has the story.
Flares lit up the night in Beirut Sunday, where tens of thousands of anti-government protesters demanded change. Demonstrators succeeded in getting Prime Minister Saad Hariri to step down last week. Now they want an overhaul of Lebanon's sectarian system.
We need medicine, electricity. This is our right. Public institutions have been robbed and we want them back.
Protesters are also calling for the resignation of President Michel Aoun and other top officials. But the president has supporters. Thousands of them rallied outside the presidential palace.
The anti-government protesters think if the president steps down, the problems would be solved. But if that happened, the crisis would just get worse.
In his speech, Aoun tried to position himself as a supporter of protesters and a crusader against corruption.
We have put forward a roadmap, and it consists of 3 points: corruption, economy, and a civil state. It's not easy to achieve these 3 points.
The president's son-in-law, Gibran Bassil, addressed a crowd. Leader of Aoun's Free Patriotic Movement, he's one of the figures most reviled by protesters.
Nobody can get rid of us because we are the people, a force. We are not just a political movement. We are the people.
The president is currently selected by parliament, and many protesters are calling for a direct popular election. But Hezbollah, Aoun's political ally, has resisted meeting the protesters' demands.
Time now to take a look at some other world news stories we're covering for you here on France 24. Bolivia's main opposition leader, Carlos Mesa, is calling for fresh elections after dismissing the results of October's vote as fraudulent. The country has been rocked by deadly violence since Evo Morales was elected for a fourth term last month. The government accusing its main rival of seeking to sow violence, with the country's interior minister decrying what he calls a coup strategy. US President Donald Trump has threatened to withhold federal aid from California as it continues to battle a series of wildfires. That after the state's Democratic governor criticized Trump over his skepticism over climate change. The fires have already ravaged some 40,000 hectares of land and forced thousands from their homes, Trump accusing Governor Gavin Newsom of doing a terrible job of forest management. And Yvette Lundy, a key figure of the French resistance, has died at the age of 103. During the Second World War, Lundy forged fake identity papers for Jews and escaped prisoners of war trying to evade capture by the Nazis. She was later caught by the Gestapo and sent to 2 concentration camps, where she survived until liberation. She spent the rest of her life teaching the importance of reconciliation. Hong Kong is bracing for yet another week of mass demonstrations as protesters continue to demand an independent inquiry into alleged police brutality. This following a weekend of often violent unrest. On Sunday, 2 people were left in a critical condition after a man attacked several with a knife. The assailant also reportedly bit off part of a local politician's ear. China, meanwhile, calling for a tougher stance to bring an end to months of unrest in the China-controlled territory. Jean-Émilie Jamin has the latest.
Eyewitnesses said it was a Mandarin-speaking man shouting pro-Beijing slogans as he brandished his knife. He began slashing his way through the crowd outside the shopping mall in Taikoo Shing, targeting pro-democracy protesters. But the most shocking moment came when the attacker allegedly launched himself at local councillor Andrew Chu, biting off the politician's ear.
This attacker goes towards Andrew Chu and used the mouth to bite Andrew's ear.
The alleged assailant was stopped in his tracks and beaten up by the nearby crowd, while other bystanders tried desperately to tend to the victims. 3 related arrests were confirmed. This on a day where riot police stormed several malls across Hong Kong. Calls had been made earlier online, urging protesters to gather in 7 locations to sustain a push for political reform, following a chaotic day of protests and clashes with police on Saturday. Officials widely condemned for their excessive use of force.
I think the police are not enforcing the law just for the sake of it. They're enforcing the law in order to release their anger. Even if we just scold them, they will arrest us and beat us up.
The latest incident concluded a turbulent day of police playing cat and mouse with protesters. And with no political solution in sight, there are few signs of the spiralling violence in the territory letting up.
An oil spill that's already affected some 200 beaches on the Brazilian coast is likely to cause yet more damage, with the country's president warning that the worst is yet to come. Over the last 3 months, oil slicks have been appearing off the coast of northeast Brazil and damaging beaches across a 2,000-kilometre stretch of shoreline. The government accusing a Greek-flagged oil tanker as the prime suspect for the leak. And some more environmental news out of Brazil. Activists are calling on the government to ramp up efforts to target illegal logging in the Amazon rainforest. That following the murder of an indigenous man who belonged to the Guardians of the Forest, a group that works to protect indigenous land from criminal logging gangs. Survival International, a group that defends indigenous rights, has slammed what they call the government's unwillingness to hold those responsible to account.
The land as a guardian of the forest in the Arariboya reservation. Paulo Paulinho Guajajara was reportedly ambushed by illegal loggers and killed. He spoke in September of the dangers of guarding the Amazon.
I'm scared sometimes, but we have to lift up our heads. We are here, fighting.
Another guardian was reported wounded in the ambush. 3 others have died in previous attacks. Rights groups are calling on the Brazilian government to end impunity for illegal loggers. The coordinator of the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, Sonia Guajajara, tweeted, "The Arariboya territory has once again lost a forest guardian for defending our territory. Now is the time to bring an end to this institutionalized genocide." Brazil's right-wing president, Jair Bolsonaro, has been accused of harming the Amazon and indigenous tribes since he took office in January. He defends his policies, saying indigenous land has to be opened up to economic development.